Hello and welcome back. You're in for a treat this week as we discuss the great horned owl. This is our first full episode on an owl, so we've got a lot to dive into. As always, our experts John Bates and Shannon Hackett teach Amanda and I all about these incredible birds. We also open up our mailbag and answer a question from one of our listeners at the end of the episode. This is a really fun one, so let's grab our binoculars, maybe some coffee, and get into it.
Oh, I forgot the purple martin thing. That our collections at the Field Museum, we have 357 purple martins in our collections, and 109 of them are from Illinois. I always like doing that. Well, that's what one of the things this podcast makes me do is to try to figure out how many we had. We had more purple martins than I thought, and we had way fewer cardinals.
Oh, that's shocking.
Interesting.
Yeah. Huh. We have actually got more great horned owls in our collections than we do cardinals. Doesn't that surprise you?
I guarantee you we're the only collection in the world that's true.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
That has more than a handful of either one. Yeah. That's funny.
That is funny.
Well, I wanted to ask about the great horned owl when we get into the episode, because I think, well, we can get into it now, I guess. I think, John, when we first met you, you had talked about how great horned owls were more at risk of like getting hit by cars and things like that. I think for eating like rats that were getting rat poison or something. Well,
they're an incredible predator. You know, they're the biggest North American owl weight-wise, and they're literally across the entire continent, and they actually go into Central America and into South America, all the way down to Tierra del Fuego. So they're an incredibly successful bird. Because of that, they're in lots of different habitats. And what I would say is they get hit by cars in areas where they're foraging along the roads. Okay. And what's happened in some of the work that we've done at the museum over the years is our former collection manager and assistant collection manager would routinely go up to Minnesota and work with the DNR offices to take their specimens that had built up that people had brought in. And it turns out that people in Minnesota are especially willing to, they see a big dead bird on the road, pick them up. Okay. And so we got an awful lot of great horned owls that way. At the same time, in the Chicago region, I've picked up 3 different great horned owls over the last 7 or 8 years that have been dead in parks and cemeteries. Oh. And one of the thoughts is that rodent poisoning may be a big factor in causing the deaths of these birds, and we're still looking into that. And I think it's definitely something to be a little concerned about in the cities, and it's certainly true that they will eat anything. Okay. So we've had them come in with porcupine quills throughout their face, and so they've actually attacked a porcupine, and it's caused enough problems that it's probably led to the death of the animal through starvation, just because they can't work anymore. Sometimes they've been porcupine quills on the feet too, and it's just so they're amazing in terms of how tenacious they are.
Yeah, I was looking up just like with their diet, and it was just talking about how basically they'll eat
anything.
Anything. Yeah, they're talking about marmots, prairie dogs, porcupine, rabbits, possum, bats, raccoons, bobcat, all kinds of birds, grouse, turkey, swans, sandhill cranes, and then also snakes, turtles, alligators, and then fish as well, bluegill, catfish, crayfish, scorpions. It was like, where won't they
They're
find
eating
food?
Things that are way bigger than they are, right? Which is interesting. How'd you like to see the great horned owl take out a bobcat, for example?
Right.
But for me, great horned owls, that's what an owl is. When you picture what an owl is in your mind, great horned owls are what I see in my eye, you know.
We were talking about videos, and one of the more memorable videos online that I can think of is of a nest cam on a peregrine falcon nest. So this is something up on a cliff, ways away from everybody else, and suddenly this great horned owl comes in and starts trying to grab the chicks and pull them off, and the adult peregrine falcon comes back. It's one of the noisiest videos you've ever heard.
Oh gosh!
And drives off the great horned owl. But it's just like really? They would come in and pick off a peregrine falcon chick? I mean,
wow.
They'll eat anything.
Yeah, I'm not messing with a peregrine falcon either.
No.
and I think it's a real secret to their success when it comes right down to it. But what happens up in Minnesota sometimes in the winter is they'll get hard freezes on the snow, and the owls, which include great horns, but also great grays and barred owls, end up starting to forage along the roads because they can't punch through the snow to get anything underneath the snow. And some of these species, like I don't know how much great horn can do this, but great grays have these large facial discs that are really sensitive, and they can hear voles and things moving underneath the snow.
Wow.
But when you can't punch through, then you end up starving, and you forage along the side of the road, and you get hit by cars, and you end up in a freezer at the Minnesota DNR office, and then you come to the Field Museum. And so that's why we would have a large number of great horned owl specimens from all over. And
is the facial disc is that specific to owls? Like, or do all owls have? I was reading about that, and that was really kind of interesting how that works.
I think it's almost entirely. It's certainly characteristic of owls. There may be a few other species out there that have modified their facial features to help them hear like that, because it's definitely a spectacular mechanism to focus sound back towards the ears.
And so they basically like manipulate the feathers on their face to be able to point it at how far something is from them, right? Like kind of like a lens on a camera. If something's really far away, you can turn the camera lens this way and pick that up or expand it.
And I don't know that they've done this with great horned owls, but barn owls, which is kind of a sister family to the rest of the owls, have these spectacular facial discs, and they've done really amazing experiments with them in complete darkness, where they can hear prey moving in a corner and catch it.
Wow.
So their ability to triangulate with that hearing, and their ears are actually at different levels.
Okay.
And it's an incredible adaptation for being able to hear movement and find it in very low light to complete darkness conditions.
And is it visible? Like you'll see their actual face move?
I was just thinking as you were saying that. I don't remember actually seeing that, but I wonder how much effort has been put into close photography.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a compromise you have to make when you're an owl, and owls' eyes they face forward like ours do, and their eyes are also ginormous. So if you were an owl, a lot of your face would be taken up. Actually, it would be even more than that, because their eyes are so big. They're so big that they are supported by bones that help hold their eye in place. But what that means is that they see really well this way. They don't. Most birds have their eyes towards the side, so they have a much wider field of view. But owls don't do that. So they're very focused in front, kind of like humans are. So they use other tools to give them a better three-dimensional perspective of their world. And so the facial discs help with that. And the ears at different levels help with that. But their vision is extremely honed to there are times when I'd like to have glasses on that made me see like other things.
Oh, yeah.
that other things do. And especially because, birds see in ultraviolet light, and I'd like to do that too, or at least to see what it was like. So I'd like to see what the world looks like from an owl's perspective. What does it look like at dusk? Mm-hmm. And as it gets darker and darker when they're foraging, what do they really see?
If they saw well enough, I don't think they would attack porcupines. But that's just me. I could be wrong.
Once, though, you don't know. There's
that's true.
No necessary lore that tells you.
For all I know, every once in a while they're successful, and porcupine tastes really good.
Yeah, maybe it was worth it.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think there are mommy and daddy great horned owls reading bedtime stories to baby owls about stranger danger when the stranger is a porcupine. Sorry, I don't think that.
So do all owls then, if they have such a wide range of what they'll eat, will all owls go after anything? Or is it like certain owls in a certain region will go after fish more than others? Or, Or is it like open season on everything for them?
So really good question. There are, because owls go from elf owl, which is the smallest owl, which is insectivorous, up to these owls that are the size of great horns. There's a lot of range. There are actually fishing owls that literally eat fish. But definitely a lot of owls are pretty wide open to eating multiple types of things depending on what they can find.
Okay. Are they taught that from an early age, or?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, they don't. I was going to say so. Great horned owls are possibly one of the first species to start nesting in the Chicago region, and probably just about anywhere else in their range each year. So great horned owls are beginning to nest in February when there's still snow on the ground in Chicago, and I don't think there's a lot of once the adults have raised the chicks up to a fledging, I don't think there's a lot of training that goes on. I think it's basically you're on your own and good luck.
Wow. But one of the things that everybody who's listening to us would be surprised if they haven't seen is an owl without its feathers on, because they look big. And actually, this is true of most birds. When you see them without their feathers on, you're like, what? This is what their skeleton looks like? But owls have a lot of feathers on them, including on their feet, as measures to keep warm on some of the species. But their bodies are actually really small when you strip away all of the feathers and muscles. The things that aren't small are the eye bones that keep their eyes in. Those are very robust, but they're very lithe outside of their...
I feel like I've seen pictures online of either... Does it, when they get wet, also they get smaller too? Or I'm trying to think why I saw a picture of an owl without feathers. It was something... It looked way smaller than I was expecting. I remember seeing it.
There was a teenage girl who came in from Atlanta today. She's really interested in birds, and I toured her around, and I took her into the bug room, which she didn't like very much because it smells bad. But when I showed her the trays that have bird skeletons from afterwards, she thought these were all tiny birds. And I'm like, no, these are robin-sized birds or bigger, and they just look so tiny. Their bones are so delicate.
Wow.
So everybody should see what a bird looks like without its bones on. Not just a chicken or a turkey, but other birds.
That's a good place to start.
Oh, yeah, but I did look it up. Oh, yeah, I wanted you to guess at how many great horned owls you think we have.
I'm going to say 380.
What? We have 387 in Illinois alone.
Ah.
Guess how many we have total?
So that means in Minnesota we must have close to 800, 900.
We have 1,687.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Wow.
So an awful lot of those will be skeletons.
Okay.
But again, I mean, this is, great horned owl is got this incredible distribution from Alaska all the way down to Terra del Fuego. And so they're not very particularly common or they're much less common, it seems to me, as you get into southern Central America and into South America, but they're there. And
so where I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, the birds are a lot darker than they are in other parts of their distributions. And there are several lineages that do that. When you're in a dark, humid, wetter environment, the birds get darker. So if you go to British Columbia and look at great horned owls, and then you go to Arizona or somewhere else in a more desert situation, look at great horned owls, you barely even know they're in the same species because they look super different.
Do they all have the little, is it a plumicorn? Is that what it's called?
I had never heard that term.
What it's called?
But it's it's actually really, I like it. I was like, at first I was like, what the heck does, but it's, so, it doesn't have anything to do with the ears. And so.
Does it serve any purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I would say is it may serve as a signaling tool as much as anything. And yet, as I say that, there are plenty of owls out there that have round heads. So maybe the ones that have plumicorns are actually able to signify to other owls that that's what they are, and maybe they ought to get out of the way, or
it could be that they look pretty.
Oh,
could be
right. That an adornment is a historical, evolutionarily historical advantage. I have no idea. If listeners know, they should send in their comments about why that happens.
Yeah, I'll leave a link.
And I'm going to go look it up.
Yeah.
I didn't think about looking it up.
But I love learning a new word like plumicorn.
Oh, I can't believe I.
What's the derivation of that word?
Are we sure it's a real word?
If
John and Shannon haven't heard it before.
I think it's a beautiful combination of this. I mean, they called them great horned owls because somebody decided that horn was as appropriate a term for that as anything else.
I think of them as tufts, but
yeah, that's true. In across owls, there are things that are called
tufted,
long tufted owlet and things like that. So
we saw one in a tree and we thought it looked like cat ears. Like we saw these big eyes and these ears and we're like, that looks like a cat.
It did.
Was it a great horned?
It was. Yeah.
So I mean, it's dramatic when you see a great horned owl and you get that silhouette. It's definitely.
Yeah, we saw one actually in the daytime. It was last fall. And
it was in a ravine.
Yeah. And we walked up and I think we spooked it and it took off and it went up to a tree and we stuck around we looked for like a half hour until we finally saw it again. And so we were sitting there looking at it and a red-tailed hawk came and landed right next to it and then looked over and I think it was like, oh gosh, what is this? And I don't think it realized it was there when it landed. But it was so much, I mean, the great horned owl was so much bigger than the red-tailed hawk. To see them side by side, we were.
So one of the things when I'm birding, I mean, it's interesting. As fierce as these owls are, during the daytime, they're just trying to find places to roost. And one of the things that happens is if small birds figure out that they're in the area, they'll start chattering around them, and that'll bring bigger birds. And so, for instance, at Memorial Park Cemetery, where I go fairly frequently, I could hear a blue jay start going off, and what I'll do often is walk over and start walking around the tree where the blue jay is. And sure enough, this great horned owl just flushed out of there and took off. And so I always think it's interesting, given how fierce they are. During the day, they're literally just trying to find a place where nothing will bother them.
Sleep, go away.
And if things find them,
Wow. Come back at dusk, I'll eat you. Right now, I need to sleep.
So will other bird species communicate together to try to spook and get it off? So they'll
all come in and check it out. Yeah.
Okay.
And they make characteristic sounds when they're mobbing that aren't the normal sounds that they would just make in their daily life. So it cues you into paying attention. If you hear a lot of these sounds, you're like, okay, there's a raptor somewhere around.
But there's a funny flip side to that, which is that there's some evidence that if there's a great horned owl nest around, other birds may benefit from breeding there because they would drive off other potential predators potentially.
Oh, interesting.
And so it is. They're definitely the big thing on the block, but they're not going to necessarily hunt any of these smaller birds, and so. Yeah, it could be a good area to find a great horned owl nest.
Why have a starling when you can have a bobcat? I don't know, but owls are so cool. Anyways, their feathers are really cool. They're adapted to fly silently, so that things that they want to eat can't hear them. And if you look at their feathers, you can really see that and how the feathers are constructed.
And then their call is so distinctive. I mean, everybody knows who. Like when you hear it's an owl. I mean, is there any other?
They don't all do that.
No.
Well, so one of the things I love about great horned owls is the other thing about owls is there's reverse sexual size dimorphism. So females are bigger than males.
Okay.
And you can actually hear that in the calls. So you'll hear this, ooh, 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 and that's a female, and the male will call, and it's like, ooh, 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 ooh. And it's actually you can hear the difference when you've got a pair calling, and the best time to do that is like January and February when they're pairing up and stuff, and it's really neat when you get a pair of them going.
And they're do they mate for life? Because once they team up, they kind of patrol the area and keep everything else out and together. Is that right?
I don't know about life. They mate for the season, I think, but
okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either. Actually, I mean, one thing that's from a nesting standpoint, they're notorious for picking off other birds of prey at nest sites, and so they'll
they don't
take
even
over,
really build their own nests.
No,
do they?
They'll take over crows' nests and things, and so they're definitely one of the most aggressive birds in the area.
If as we've been talking about owls, I've thought about this. Like a few years ago, there was a thing online, and it was like a cartoon or like a computer generated thing. Like if a tiger fought a lion, like, which would never happen in real life, but like they did all the size and whatever to like theorize what would win in this fight, and I can't even remember what won. Do you remember that?
I don't know if I remember.
Oh, it was so silly, but but now I'm wondering like if let's take another North American, like a bald eagle and an owl, like a great horned owl, were to
who would win?
Yeah,
I have my guess. I'm betting on the eagle because of its feet. Its talons. I don't know.
Well, just sheer size, I think it would probably.
I don't know.
Okay.
It could.
That would be an interesting. I have seen birds fight in the wild, and it is wild to watch birds fight like that. Not that big birds like that, but woodpeckers basically fighting to the death at one of the field sites I was at, and it was dramatic. One driving the other one to the ground, and they were writhing together. And
oh my gosh, we had a similar experience a few weeks ago. We saw two red-bellied woodpeckers, and we couldn't tell. It seemed territorial, but they in the air like grabbed feet and were like spiraling together, and they fell like 30 feet down to the ground and bounced. And we were trying. Then they got up and went after it again. But we were like, "Is this a territorial thing, or was it some type of mating thing?"
Yeah. What do you guys think?
I'm going to guess territorial. I've been watching a red-bellied woodpecker nest in our backyard that just fledged one chick, and in that situation there was a male, and I think he was trying to attract a female. A female finally showed up, and then there was a second female that came in, and there they would just kind of drive them off. So I'm guessing that it'd be interesting to know what the sex was of those birds, but I'm going to predict that they were two males or something, and that was a territorial dispute. I wonder what great horned owls do versus one another in those situations. I mean, we've been in places in southern Wisconsin where on a Christmas bird count where the weather's the night is perfect and still, and these birds are starting to set up territories where in a single little part of the Christmas count circle we've had birds calling, 20 individuals calling in the area that sound like they're all on territories, and some of those may be pairs, so maybe 10 territories across that area. But those birds have to come into contact one another once in a while too. What would happen? Yeah, wow. I don't know.
Oh man.
Wow.
I would bet on the female over the male.
Always.
Yeah.
Good answer, John.
Way to go, John.
All right. Well, should we get into a mailbag question for this one?
Sure.
So this is from a listener, Heather Skeen.
Oh,
she didn't share her location.
She's one of our graduate students.
She is. Okay.
So,
okay.
Former graduate student.
Yeah, she's now fledged.
Oh, okay.
As a postdoc in Connecticut.
Well, her question is something I think you and John should answer. I don't know if Amanda and I could field anything on this one, but she asks, what is a species and why does it matter?
Yeah. So this is what keeps us employed, actually. It's not a simple question. There are currently 10,800 species of birds, and Shannon and I would both say a number of those could be split up into multiple species.
But we wouldn't say the same thing.
And great horned owl is an interesting example. So, for instance, great horned owls get down to South America, as we've been talking about, and the South American population is genetically distinct. And I wanted to mention earlier that there's actually a graduate student from the University of Kansas right now who's doing her dissertation on genetic structure across all great horned owls, and it'll be interesting to see what she finds. But they've split the southern great horned owls from the northern great horned owls, and so that's no longer one species but two. Oh, and wow. Again, our podcast will go for a long time. If we get into
she texted. I wrote her today. I'm like, what the heck is the matter with you? And she laughed back. She goes, I want to hear you handle that in a podcast time frame. You are evil. But there are lots of criteria you can use to decide what a species is. And classically, it's been whether or not individuals can reproduce with each other, can interbreed with each other. And that's been a defining characteristic for what might be the limits of a species. But what happens in that sense is that there's a lot of birds who can interbreed that are nowhere near each other's closest relatives. And so you get these situations where there can be interbreeding when you put them together, but in nature they don't come together. So what do you call these things? And then we, with different techniques, like genetics in particular, we can start to see genetically distinct lineages that usually have a geographic component, and they may be vocally different too. So now people emphasize vocal differences. There could be genetic differences, but they could still interbreed. So what do you do with them? Because nature's not nice, right? It's not clean and clear. And species concepts, I have seen the worst behavior in my entire career associated with people fighting about what a species is, what species concepts are. In fact, John and I have fought about it many times because he thinks species are real and I don't. So, and it matters whether they're real to people who think they or could be real. It matters when you're counting the diversity in a region and looking at whether biodiversity is being lost. The currency of that is species. Personally, I don't think it should be, but it is. I don't get to say. It's not my, don't get to wave my magic wand and know a bunch of things or dictate a bunch of things. But I do think these are very complicated concepts. But we don't think of it like that. Well, you know what a species is. I can open my bird book. It tells me what a species is. And then it tells me this species is now split from this other species, which makes everybody kind of nervous. How many times are you going to do that? How many times are you going to split things up? I like trees.
Everything's part of something, and
yeah, I mean,
instead of being broken up.
Taxonomy can be really hard. It's hard to know where the limits of something you put a name on. Trees they can be messy too, but trees are more visually appealing to me. They're pleasing.
Yeah, with the interesting caveat that as we get more and more genomic data, we're finding these evolutionary trees actually can capture history of genetic exchange potentially in ways that we've never thought about before. And that's going to
so you hear that with the Neanderthal, right?
That
how many genes do people have that come from Neanderthal? And it's the same kind of argument, except now we can look at it.
If you want to talk about an oversplit group of animals, the genus Homo was at the top of the list.
But we have a student who works on parrots, and humans have done bizarre things to parrots. It's really unbelievable. They can and do successfully mate and produce lineages of offspring of things that are nowhere near each other in the parrot tree of life. And they, for whatever reason, I don't really know why, parrots are capable of interbreeding if you stick them in the same cage, even though they'd never do that in the wild.
And ducks are famous for
ducks too.
For lots of hybridization. So the idea that hybridizing is what determines a species, I think, is problematic. And one of the interesting things now is we've got all these new tools, genetic tools to look at population structure, like Shannon was saying, but we can go into details into morphology, and we've got much better spatial information about where things are and stuff.
And we have ways of quantifying vocal differences now in ways that technology has really enabled us.
So I've been pointing out to people that back in the 70s, experts from the American Ornithological Union were saying that there were about 9,000 species of birds, and now there are 10,800. So just in 50 years, the number of species has gone up about 16%, even in a group of animals like birds, which are considered to be some of the best studied animals in the world. And so, I think that tells you how much we need to learn about biodiversity.
Yeah. Wow. Well, That was a good question. I'm glad we got into that. Yeah,
No,
I'd love to. We could do a whole episode on a bird that maybe has broken off into a different species, or if there's some
we should do that.
Yeah.
We could find some neat examples.
Juncos are a good example of things that have been.
Yeah.
No,
that's a good idea.
The field guide page for juncos looks a lot different now than it did when I first started bird watching.
I'm going to root for scaleback dampbird.
Well, yes, okay.
Which is a bird I studied in Amazonia for a long time. So.
Okay, let's
but
do
they
that.
don't do you the courtesy of looking different.
Yes, they do. Yeah, they're really interesting with respect to that. But it, again, that's one of the beauties of our job is that there are, like, every lineage has some different aspects to that story, which gets us up in the morning and gets us excited about getting into the museum and looking at stuff.
Yeah.
So fighting about what a species is easy to do. What is a lot more fun to do is to understand how birds are changing across space and time. And the construct of a species that you put on top of it is, to me, it's a political decision. And it causes the same kind of political nonsense that actual politics causes.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that takes us away from the patterns in nature that we're trying to describe and understand why these birds are the way they are, why they're found here, why they look this way, why they sound this way. And I don't like to get caught up in labels, but it's this whole label thing that has made people famous. Ernst Mayr is one of the most famous ornithologists who's ever existed, and he coined the biological species concept, and the reproductive compatibility is a big part of that. And certainly eventually things don't reproduce together, but that's a long sliding window of when that happens. And so eventually things become both genetically differentiated, morphologically differentiated, behaviorally differentiated, and don't interbreed. But that's not a consistent thing that you can apply all over the place. So it's hard to be consistent with what you call a species. Okay. But you have to, the thing in science is you have to label your species concept. Right. So if you want to talk about speciation, tell me what your idea of a species is, and then I'll understand what you're saying with your data, because someone else who has a different species concept can come in and it would be different. Their interpretation of things would be different. So you just have to be clear. And that's the most important aspect of it, is being clear to what you're describing and what you're saying, rather than the kind of silly fighting that happens over what a species is.
Okay.
But we have fought about what a species is plenty of times.
Yeah, it makes for good.
Because I know what it is.
Yeah, well, that's what it. Who is it that says whatever a good taxonomist? What's that?
Well,
quote?
Charles Darwin basically has a line that says everybody basically knows what a species is, as Shannon said earlier, and it's like, yeah, but you're going to talk about how we're going to understand what natural selection is. It's about the term speciation. And there's a whole nother, as Shannon's saying, like, what it takes to make two different populations different enough to potentially consider them to be species is all about evolutionary biology. And so it's really
beauty's in the
neat
eye of the beholder, too. Some lineages of birds make differences really fast that nobody would have problems recognizing as different species. They look really different, so it's comfortable. But some things can get genetically distinct and not morphologically distinct. Some things can get behaviorally distinct but not morphologically distinct, and sometimes not genetically distinct. So what you place the priority on is complicated. Yeah. And so that's what gets into the arguing parts. How many of these differences do you have to do? I'm just interested in the pattern that comes out.
Yeah.
Then we can all infer all kinds of processes on top of that, but the pattern is the pattern.
Yeah. Well, I think Heather knew what she was doing sending in that question,
yes.
so I hope she got what she was looking for.
It's not the first time she's been part of a conversation
I was gonna
like
say,
that.
I often call the white-breasted nuthatches, I see at my feet are eastern white-breasted nuthatches, which is something that eBird allows you to do.
Oh. Okay.
And I think eventually somebody's going to put together some genetics data someday that actually show where the break is between eastern birds and western birds.
Okay.
And, as Shannon's saying, it's like, is it purely geographic, or which I think is underappreciated, and I think geography is really important, but is it, are they morphologically distinct? And they do have some minor morphological differences, but if they're genetically distinct, then I would have no trouble calling them two different species.
How different do you have to be before you're going to be called a new species?
Oh, yeah.
And that's where the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Because I might think something's really critically important, and John might look at it and say, that's just a trivial little difference.
Oh, okay.
And, nature has a way of gumming it all up by interbreeding.
Yeah.
So, or historically interbreeding and then separated after that, which is a really bad thing because that's technologically really difficult to kind of tease apart that something is a hybrid species.
Okay. A lot of gray area, it seems like.
Oh, yeah.
It's all gray area,
It's all
which
gray.
is why it
Everything's gray.
engenders so much discussion.
Sometimes the gray area, I was going to say sometimes the gray areas are the most fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that is a good place to stop for today. Anybody have anything they want to add?
Are you going to put that whole species thing a podcast in and of itself?
It might end up being one. We'll see.
Yeah. So
next time I'm making Heather come with us.
Great horned owls are really amazing birds.
Thanks everyone for listening. We want to give a shout out to Earhole Studios in Chicago for allowing us to record there. They're amazing for helping us out with this. Also, if you have any questions for John, Shannon, Amanda, and I, feel free to send them to podcast.birdsofafeather@gmail.com, and we'll make sure to get to them on our next episode. Also, just a friendly reminder that we're trying to spread the word about our podcast. Please, if you know someone that would enjoy our podcast, tell them about it and share it with them. We're also active on Instagram. I'll put a link on the podcast description, so feel free to give us a follow and share our page as well. Thanks everyone for listening. Have a good one.